Emma sat in the small, dimly lit room of her apartment, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background as the clock ticked steadily toward midnight. She rubbed her tired eyes, her gaze fixed on the numbers flickering on the screen of her laptop. She had been up for hours, scouring the internet for potential funding options for her son's surgery, her fingers growing numb with the constant clicking. But despite all her research, despite every desperate attempt, she kept coming back to the same thought. How would she ever afford it? Her son, Liam, had been diagnosed with a congenital heart defect at birth. The doctors had told her it was something that could be treated, but it wasn't something that could be fixed with just any procedure. Liam needed open-heart surgery, a complicated and expensive procedure that could cost up to $100,000. The number had been thrown at her like a lifeline and a weight all at once. She couldn't even begin to wrap her head around the cost. It was something beyond the reach of any regular family, even one like hers. Emma wasn't wealthy. In fact, she wasn't even comfortable. She worked a steady, full-time job as a paralegal at a local law firm. But with Liam's medical bills and everyday expenses, it barely covered the basics. She lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, in a building that had seen better days. The neighbors were kind, though they too struggled with the same issues. Unpredictable incomes, medical costs, the endless grind of making ends meet. But Emma wasn't going to let her circumstances define her. She was determined to do everything she could to give Liam a chance at a full and healthy life. For the past 2 years, Emma had been saving what little she could. It wasn't much. She set up a special savings account just for Liam's surgery, depositing whatever she could spare from her paycheck. Some weeks, it was just $20. Other weeks, it was $50. And on the rare occasions when she could push herself, she managed to put aside $100. But no matter how hard she tried, it seemed like she was always falling short. It felt like every time she took a step forward, another medical bill or emergency expense dragged her 2 steps back. She couldn't do it alone, though. She didn't have any family nearby, but her cousin, Kyle, had always been someone she could rely on. They had grown up together, their families close-knit despite the distance between them. When Emma's mother passed away from cancer 5 years ago, it was Kyle who had offered to help her out with the funeral expenses, even though they weren't particularly wealthy themselves. Over the years, he had come to represent more than just a cousin. He had become the person Emma trusted, the one person she could turn to when everything else seemed like it was falling apart. Kyle had never been financially stable, but Emma had always admired his ability to keep moving forward. He had struggled through a series of jobs, none of which seemed to stick, and had even started a few businesses that hadn't panned out. But he had always been positive, a perpetual optimist who believed that everything would work out in the end. He was someone who encouraged her when she felt like giving up. He always told her, "Don't worry, Emma. You'll figure it out. You're strong. You can do this." When Emma found out about the surgery, it was Kyle who was the first person she confided in. She'd called him that day, after the doctors had given her the grim news. Her heart had broken as she recounted the details of Liam's diagnosis, the heart condition that could worsen over time, the limited options for treatment, the fear that it might one day be too late. She had expected him to say something sympathetic, to express concern, but instead, his response had been reassuring. "Don't worry, Em. You're going to get the money you need," he had said, his voice calm, steady. "You'll find a way, and Liam will be fine. Kids heal fast." Those words had meant everything to Emma. She trusted Kyle implicitly, believing that if anyone could help her, it would be him. He was family, and families helped each other out, didn't they? Kyle had promised to help however he could. He didn't have a lot of money himself, but he assured her that he'd find a way to contribute. Emma had always taken these promises with a grain of salt. She knew Kyle's financial situation wasn't great, but she appreciated his offer of support. What she hadn't anticipated was that Kyle would be the one to help her in a way she never could have imagined. He had asked her for the account details to her savings, claiming that he would handle it, suggesting that he could invest some money for her or even find ways to raise funds through his network of contacts. Emma hesitated at first, but Kyle's reassuring words had washed away any doubt. She trusted him. She believed in him. She had no reason not to. He was her cousin. After all, someone who had always been there for her in the past, someone who had promised to help her when the world seemed too big and too difficult to navigate alone. After a few weeks of back-and-forth discussions, Emma transferred the money she had saved into a secure online account. She did this with the understanding that Kyle would use his connections to help her access additional funding or find ways to raise awareness for Liam's situation. She wasn't entirely comfortable handing over all of the money she had worked so hard for, but in her heart, she believed that this was the only way to make sure Liam could get the surgery he desperately needed. She trusted Kyle, and for the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to feel hopeful. Life continued as usual for the next few weeks. Emma's mind often returned to the surgery, to the money she had entrusted to Kyle, but she pushed those thoughts aside. She focused on her work, caring for Liam, and keeping up with the demands of daily life. Every now and then, Kyle would check in, offering encouragement. He'd say things like, "We're going to make this happen, Emma. Don't worry." And Emma didn't. She couldn't. Not when Kyle was doing everything he could. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. Emma had just come home from work and was sitting down to dinner when she decided to check her bank account. It was a routine she had fallen into, a way to ensure that things were still on track. But when she logged into her account, her heart dropped. The balance was significantly lower than it should have been. Panic surged through her chest as she refreshed the page, hoping her eyes were playing tricks on her. But the numbers were still the same. She checked the transaction history, hoping it was a mistake, but no. There it was, the large transfer, made from her savings account to an unfamiliar bank account, an account she didn't recognize. Her mind raced. Was this a fraud? Had someone hacked her account? She immediately contacted the bank, and, after a long, agonizing wait, the bank confirmed that the transfer had been initiated from her account and sent to a third-party account under Kyle's name. A wave of disbelief crashed over her. She couldn't comprehend it. How could this happen? She had trusted him. Kyle had promised to help her, not to steal from her. She called him immediately, her hands trembling as she dialed his number. When he picked up, Emma didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Kyle," she said, her voice tight with shock. "What happened to the money I saved for Liam's surgery?" There was a long pause on the other end. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained, but defensive. I didn't think you'd miss it. I needed it for something urgent. You know, things have been rough for me. I'll pay you back. I swear. You don't need all of it right now." Her heart pounded in her chest. "You stole from me, Kyle. You took everything I've worked for. You know how important that money was. I didn't think it would matter that much. Kids heal fast, Emma. You'll find another way. You're strong. You can make it work." Emma felt her world shatter. The anger, the betrayal, it was too much to process. But the part that hurt the most was his casual dismissal of her son's life. Liam's future wasn't something to be brushed aside with empty words like "kids heal fast." This wasn't just about money. It was about her son's life. "I trusted you," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. But Kyle's only response was an uncomfortable silence. In that moment, Emma realized just how wrong she had been to place so much trust in him. The surgery that she had been so close to making a reality for Liam seemed impossibly far away now. The days following the phone call with Kyle felt like a blur to Emma. Each moment seemed suspended in disbelief, and she couldn't quite grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. The weight of betrayal pressed on her chest, making every breath feel shallow and difficult. Her mind constantly raced back to that conversation, replaying his words over and over in her head. "Kids heal fast, Emma. You'll find a way." She had expected anger, frustration, or at least some sign of remorse from him. Instead, it felt as though he had dismissed her and her son's suffering entirely. Emma spent the next few hours pacing around her apartment, her eyes darting from the kitchen table to the window, not sure where to focus. She couldn't concentrate. She couldn't sleep. The money that had taken her so long to save, the money that represented Liam's future, was gone. And no matter how many times she checked the bank's transaction history, the numbers never changed. The money had been transferred, and there was no going back. She couldn't just let it go. She couldn't ignore what had happened. This wasn't just a simple mistake or misunderstanding. It was a betrayal. Kyle had taken something irreplaceable, and now the surgery Liam desperately needed seemed farther out of reach than ever. Emma spent the next few days in a state of emotional turmoil. She was angry, heartbroken, and terrified for her son. Each moment she spent thinking about it only deepened the wound. She had tried so hard to keep Liam's world stable, to shield him from the harsh realities of their lives. But now, this betrayal had shattered that fragile sense of security. The person who was supposed to be her ally, her family, had stolen from her. She had no idea what to do next. At first, Emma tried to reason with herself. Maybe Kyle hadn't meant for it to go this far. Maybe it had been a mistake, a rash decision made out of desperation. But as the hours turned into days, and the anger slowly replaced any hope of reconciliation, Emma realized the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't a mistake. Kyle had deliberately taken the money, knowing exactly what it meant to her. She tried calling him several more times after that first conversation, but he never answered. Every time she left a message, it was as though her words fell into a void. Emma was furious, but she was also devastated. Her cousin, her family, the person she had trusted most in the world, was now the one who had put her in this impossible situation. She could barely look at the phone without feeling sick to her stomach. The next day, she went to work, trying to keep herself busy. But even at the law firm, she couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to Kyle and the money. How could she ever trust anyone again? How could she trust anyone with something so important, so precious? Her thoughts were a constant swirl of frustration and fear. She couldn't just let it go. She needed answers. She needed to know why Kyle had done this, and she needed to find a way to make things right. After work, Emma went home and sat at the kitchen table, looking at Liam's picture on the wall across from her. Her son was just a little boy, innocent and full of life, with his bright eyes and laughter that filled every corner of their small apartment. Liam had always been her greatest joy, and his surgery was the only thing that mattered. She had worked so hard to save for it, and now that dream seemed more distant than ever. The money Kyle had taken wasn't just a number. It represented hope, it represented Liam's future, and it was gone. Her hands shook as she took out her phone and dialed the number for the bank again. She needed to know more. She needed to understand how this could have happened, how Kyle had been able to take her money without anyone noticing. The representative on the other end was patient, but even after she explained the situation, there was little they could do. The transfer had been made to Kyle's account, and there was no way to reverse it unless she could prove it was fraud. Emma knew the truth. It wasn't fraud. It wasn't a mistake. Kyle had done this. She had trusted him, and now that trust was shattered. With a sinking feeling in her stomach, Emma started to look for other options. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She had to think of a way to raise the money again, somehow, some way. She couldn't let Liam go without the surgery he so desperately needed. He couldn't wait. Over the next few days, Emma did everything she could to raise the funds. She posted on social media, explaining her situation, asking for help, trying to drum up support for Liam's surgery. She set up a crowdfunding campaign, reaching out to anyone who might be willing to donate, but the response was slow. She tried contacting other family members, but they had nothing to offer. It felt as though she was fighting a losing battle, and each rejection weighed heavily on her already fragile spirit. Then, a week later, there was a breakthrough. Emma's mother-in-law, who had always been supportive but never financially well off, called her out of the blue. She had seen Emma's campaign and felt compelled to help. Though she couldn't offer a large sum, she sent Emma a check with a note that read, "This is for Liam. Don't give up, Emma. He needs you, and you need to keep fighting." Emma wept when she saw the check. It wasn't much, but it was something that proved not everyone had turned their back on her. Yet even with the small donations that trickled in, Emma couldn't shake the anger and betrayal she felt toward Kyle. She spent sleepless nights wondering why he had done it, why he had been so callous. How could he have stolen from her, from Liam, with no remorse? It didn't make sense. Kyle was never this person. He had always been the one to offer support, to encourage her when she was down. He had been the one to tell her, "Everything will work out. You'll figure it out, Emma. You're strong." But now, when the stakes were the highest, when Liam's life was on the line, Kyle had acted out of his own desperation, with no regard for the consequences. And what hurt most was that Emma had trusted him completely. She had believed in him, and now she was left with nothing but the shattered remnants of that trust. Days turned into weeks. Emma's fundraising campaign began to pick up momentum, but the process was slow. She did everything she could, reaching out to friends, posting updates, organizing small charity events at her local church. Every little bit helped, but it wasn't enough. The clock was ticking, and Liam's condition wasn't improving. She felt like she was running out of time, and every step forward felt like 2 steps back. In the meantime, Kyle remained silent. He hadn't called, hadn't offered an apology or an explanation. His absence only made Emma feel more isolated. She couldn't understand how he could just walk away from her, from Liam, after everything. The silence was deafening. Finally, after a month of trying to keep things together, Emma knew she couldn't wait any longer. She filed a police report. She didn't want to do it. She had never imagined she would be in this situation with her family. But it was the only way to get some answers, to recover what had been taken from her. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew that even if the authorities got involved, it might not lead to anything. But she had no other choice. The police report was a formality, but it was also a declaration. Emma was taking control of the situation. She was fighting for Liam, fighting for his future. She wasn't going to let Kyle's betrayal destroy everything she had worked for. She wasn't going to let him steal Liam's life away. The weeks that followed were filled with frustration. Kyle had vanished without a trace, and the investigation wasn't moving quickly enough. But despite the legal and emotional battle, Emma found strength she didn't know she had. Every day, she kept fighting, knowing that her son's life depended on it. Kyle might have stolen her money, but he hadn't taken her will to fight, and that was something he could never take away. The first few days after Emma had filed the police report felt like an endless spiral into a pit of exhaustion and helplessness. She had hoped that once she took that step, once she involved the authorities, the situation would change, that she would somehow get the answer she needed. But as the days turned into weeks, Emma realized that things were not going to be that simple. The legal system wasn't going to work at her pace, and she would have to keep fighting whether or not the world around her seemed to be moving forward. In the meantime, the most pressing issue remained: Liam's surgery. His condition hadn't improved, and Emma could see it every time she looked at him. Though he was still the sweet, smiling boy who loved playing with his toy cars and watching cartoons, there were times when she saw him faltering, his breaths a little more labored, his energy a little lower. The fear was always present, just beneath the surface. Emma couldn't bear to see her son in pain, but every day that passed without the surgery, it felt like she was running out of time. She had tried to keep her emotions in check around Liam, hiding her own stress and anxiety from him as best as she could. She didn't want him to know just how much she was hurting, how worried she was that they might not be able to get the surgery in time. But there were moments when he looked at her, his little face full of concern, and Emma felt a sharp pang in her chest. His big, trusting eyes seemed to hold all the questions she couldn't answer. One evening, as they were having dinner together, Liam suddenly asked, "Mom, when can I go to the doctor to fix my heart?" Emma froze for a moment, the words catching in her throat. She had been avoiding this conversation for months, not knowing how to explain things to her son in a way that wouldn't scare him. She had always told him that everything would be fine, that the doctor would make him better. But now, she couldn't give him that reassurance. Her stomach twisted with guilt. I don't know, sweetheart," she said, her voice strained, though she tried to sound calm. "But we're doing everything we can, I promise." Liam smiled and nodded, but Emma could see the doubt in his eyes. And she hated it. She hated that she couldn't give him more than empty promises. That night, after Liam had gone to bed, Emma sat in the dark living room, staring out of the window at the streetlights flickering in the distance. The silence of the apartment was deafening. The only sound was the soft rustling of the leaves outside and the occasional creak of the old building settling. But it was in this silence that the weight of everything really hit her. The money that Kyle had stolen, the surgery that seemed farther and farther out of reach, and the ever-growing fear that her son's health was deteriorating with every passing day. The next morning, Emma went to work, though she had little focus for it. The law firm was a distraction, but it couldn't make the situation go away. Her colleagues had been kind, offering sympathy and support, but it didn't change the fact that she was still stuck. They couldn't help her raise the money. They couldn't fix her broken trust. And every day she sat at her desk, staring at the pile of paperwork. All she could think about was Liam. She had become good at hiding her feelings, but inside, she felt as if she were crumbling. She had heard nothing from Kyle since he had taken the money. His phone calls went unanswered, and every attempt to reach out to him had been met with silence. Emma had hoped, at first, that he would come around, that he would realize the gravity of what he had done and make things right. But as the days stretched on, she began to accept the harsh reality. Kyle wasn't going to help her. He wasn't going to fix this. Emma knew that she had to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't afford to wait for Kyle, and she couldn't afford to wait for the police investigation to unfold at its own pace. She needed a solution, and she needed it now. She began reaching out to people she had never imagined would help. She contacted every charity, every organization, and even reached out to her local community for support. She shared her story in every possible way, hoping that someone, anyone, might be able to help her raise the money for Liam's surgery. One afternoon, while she was sitting in her office, going through some forms, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number wasn't one she recognized, but something in her gut told her it was important. She answered quickly, her heart racing. "Hello," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Emma," the voice on the other end said, and it took her a moment to recognize it. It was her mother-in-law, Carol, the woman who had always been a steady presence in her life. "I've been following the crowdfunding page you set up. I just want you to know that we're here for you. I know it's not much, but I've been talking to some people, and we've set up a fundraiser at the church this weekend. People have already started contributing. I know it's not the full amount, but it's something, and we're going to keep pushing." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. It wasn't the money she needed. It was the support, the reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. She had always tried to be strong on her own, but it was moments like these when someone reached out that gave her the strength to keep going. "Thank you, Carol," Emma said, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know what to say. It means so much to me." To Liam. The call ended, and Emma sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in her hand, the weight of everything threatening to crash down on her. But just as quickly as the wave of despair came, it was replaced with a flicker of hope. It wasn't over yet. She could still fight. She could still make sure Liam got the surgery he needed. That weekend, the fundraiser at the church was held. It wasn't the grand event she had hoped for, but it was something, an effort made by people who genuinely cared. The small community of churchgoers, many of whom had known Emma for years, had pulled together. They made donations, shared their own stories, and helped spread the word. Every dollar mattered. Every effort felt like a small victory. But despite the generous contributions, it was clear that Emma still wasn't close to reaching the goal she needed. The surgery was urgent, and the clock was ticking. But it wasn't just the money that weighed on Emma. It was the emotional toll. Her trust in Kyle, in family, in people, had been shattered, and she found herself questioning everything she had once believed. Kyle's betrayal had left scars that would take far longer to heal than the physical wounds Liam would eventually recover from. The emotional exhaustion was overwhelming, and at times, Emma felt as though she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had to keep it together for Liam, though. That was the only thing that mattered. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had to stop relying on Kyle. He was no longer a part of this story. He had chosen to remove himself from it. It was time for Emma to put the past behind her and focus on the future. Over the next few weeks, the fundraiser continued to bring in small contributions, and Emma managed to secure a loan from a local financial institution, although it was far from enough to cover the full cost of the surgery. But with every dollar that came in, Emma felt a little more empowered. She still had a long way to go, but she was taking control of the situation, fighting for her son in a way she never thought possible. She was no longer sitting around waiting for someone to save her. She was saving herself, and saving Liam. Despite all of this, there was still the ever-present shadow of Kyle's betrayal hanging over her. She knew that once the dust settled, once Liam had his surgery and started recovering, she would have to face the reality of what had happened with Kyle. She couldn't just ignore it. But for now, her focus was on Liam, on making sure he got the surgery he needed and on giving him the life he deserved. The rest, for now, would have to wait. The pain, the frustration, the disappointment, they could wait. Because for Liam, Emma would keep fighting. She would fight for him until there was nothing left to fight with. There was no other choice. And so, with each passing day, Emma's resolve grew stronger. She would not let this moment define her or her son's future. No matter how hard it got, no matter how much she had to sacrifice, she would keep going for Liam, for the chance at a better life. And nothing at all was going to take that away from her. Emma had fought for weeks, scraping together every bit of hope and every ounce of strength she had. She had felt like a single person trying to move a mountain, the weight of the world on her shoulders as she raced against time to get Liam the surgery he desperately needed. And while the money was still short, Emma had made some significant progress. The fundraiser had been a success, albeit not as large as she'd hoped, but it was enough to show Emma that her community and even complete strangers had rallied behind her. They had shown her that, even in a world that often felt disconnected, there were still people who cared. But as the weeks wore on, Emma's mental and emotional state began to deteriorate. The constant pressure, the worry for Liam's health, the strain of trying to keep her job, while also handling the legal ramifications of Kyle's betrayal. It was too much. Emma had always been independent and proud of her ability to handle things on her own, but now she felt herself breaking. The late nights, the constant juggling of responsibilities, and the overwhelming fear that she might not make it in time to save her son were starting to take their toll. She was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, and the mental toll was becoming harder to ignore. The toll on her body, too, was evident. She had lost weight from the stress, her hands trembled at times, and she couldn't sleep without waking up in cold sweats, haunted by the thought that Liam might not survive. There were moments when she felt completely alone in the battle, the walls of her apartment feeling smaller and smaller. She'd spend hours staring at Liam while he slept, feeling helpless as she thought about his future. He was still her bright, sweet boy, but he was beginning to understand, more than Emma realized, that things weren't as simple as they once seemed. Every time he asked when the surgery was going to happen, Emma felt a stab of guilt. And yet, despite all the turmoil, the world around Emma was moving forward, not pausing to wait for her to catch up. Her coworkers, although sympathetic, continued with their own lives. The case she had been working on had moved to a crucial phase, and although she had kept up with her professional duties, there was a sense of detachment from her former self. She felt disconnected from the person she once was, focused, confident, and in control. Now, she was just a mother fighting for her son. In the midst of all this, Emma received a call from the police. After weeks of investigation into the theft of the money, they had finally managed to track down Kyle. The authorities had found him living in a small town outside the city, and although he hadn't been completely forthcoming, they had enough evidence to arrest him for theft and fraud. Emma was initially numb when she received the news. She had wondered, deep down, whether Kyle would ever be brought to justice, but she hadn't truly expected it to happen. The man who had once been a trusted family member, who had known her as well as anyone, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And yet, now that the legal wheels were turning, Emma realized that she wasn't sure what to feel. When the police reached out to her again a few days later, it was with the news that Kyle had agreed to a plea deal. He was facing a significant jail sentence, but the terms of the deal included him being required to pay restitution for the money he had stolen. It wasn't a full resolution to the damage he had caused, but it was something that would give Emma the financial support she needed to finally get Liam's surgery. The news didn't feel like a victory, though. Kyle's betrayal had left a mark that no amount of money could fix. Emma had learned the hard way that not all family members could be relied upon. and not all relationships were built on mutual trust. Kyle had taken something priceless from her, and no legal consequence would ever change the emotional scars that would linger for years to come. But in that moment, as she hung up the phone after speaking with the police, Emma felt a shift in her perspective. She had spent so much time focusing on what she had lost, her trust in her family, the money she had saved for Liam's surgery, that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge everything she had gained. The community support, the efforts of people she didn't even know, had carried her through the darkest days. And despite everything, Liam was still here. He was still fighting, still smiling, still full of the same love and warmth he had always given her. The phone call with the police had been a turning point, not because it marked the end of Kyle's involvement in her life, but because it gave Emma the closure she needed to move on from the anger and betrayal. She had fought, and she had won in her own way. The money would be paid back, and she could finally turn her attention to what mattered most, getting Liam the medical help he needed. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Emma had secured the rest of the funds for the surgery, and although she wasn't completely sure of how she had managed to do it, she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't expected. She had faced the worst moments of her life, the loss of trust, the financial strain, the fear of losing her son, and had somehow come through it all. The surgery was scheduled, and Liam was going to get the help he so desperately needed. The day of the surgery arrived, and Emma's nerves were at an all-time high. She had prepared Liam as best as she could, explaining what would happen in simple terms, but the anxiety she felt for him mirrored the one she had felt for weeks. She had prayed so many times, asking for a miracle, for a chance for her son to grow up healthy and happy. Now, that chance was within her grasp, and yet the fear still clung to her. As they wheeled Liam into the operating room, Emma fought the tears that threatened to fall. She kissed him on the forehead, whispering that she loved him, that everything was going to be okay. He looked at her with his innocent eyes, too young to understand the weight of the situation, but trusting her completely. "I'll be here when you wake up, baby," she said, her voice breaking. Hours later, when the surgery was over, the doctor came out to speak with her. Emma could barely keep herself together as the surgeon smiled and told her that everything had gone as planned. The procedure had been a success, and while there was a long recovery ahead, Liam would be just fine. It was as if the weight of the past several months had been lifted from her shoulders. The feeling of relief was overwhelming, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma allowed herself to breathe deeply. She had done it. Against all odds, she had saved her son. Over the next few days, Emma stayed by Liam's side in the hospital, watching as he slowly recovered. He was tired and sore, but he was strong, and as each day passed, he grew a little stronger. And with each passing day, Emma felt her own strength return as well. The battle wasn't over. The scars of Kyle's betrayal would remain, and the emotional toll would take longer to heal, but Emma had finally reached the end of this chapter. Her son was going to be okay. That was all that mattered. When they finally left the hospital, Emma held Liam's hand tightly as they walked out into the sunlight. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Emma felt a sense of hope. She had survived the hardest battle of her life, and now, with Liam by her side, she could start rebuilding the trust that had been broken piece by piece. She knew it would take time, but she was ready. As they walked home, Emma felt the weight of the world lift off her chest. She had done what she had set out to do. She had protected Liam, fought for him, and brought him the chance he deserved. The betrayal of Kyle, while painful, was something she could now set aside. It had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She was stronger than she had ever known. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt, but Emma knew one thing for sure. She had the strength to face whatever came next. For Liam, for her family, for herself. And as they reached the door of their apartment, Emma looked down at her son, smiling through the exhaustion and the tears. "We did it, buddy," she whispered. "We really did it." And for the first time in months, Emma felt peace.